Hey everyone, welcome to an advanced sports analytics live stream. Today is Wednesday, May 26th. We've got a three-game playoff slate tonight in the NBA. Atlanta, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, and Utah versus Memphis. Going to cover tonight's action on SuperDraft, specifically their three-game slate in which they have a number of GPP contests available, kind of different entry points, as well as featured showdown or single game contests for the New York Atlanta game, which proved to be a very compelling and interesting game in game one. So we'll dive right in, starting first with the main slate. Going to share my screen to just go over some looking through projections, optimizer use cases, etc. So in the optimizer, tabbing to SuperDraft, we're going to be using the classic format to start, kind of the multi-game multiplier mode. If you've been watching these, of course, you know projected SuperDraft points, the number of raw points projected for each player, value, the number of post-multiplier projected fantasy points for every player. So yeah, starting at the top and looking at guards, Westbrook, man, I mean, he does pretty much everything. Beal is back, which, you know, I do think might lower some of Westbrook's shot attempts, but it's still expecting him to be very high usage. Got an insane assist rate near 40%. So, I mean, I think at this point we kind of know the drill with Westbrook. You know, a triple-double threat any night. Also adds plus defense, mostly through steals, but can also block a shot or two here and there. Played a whopping 43 minutes, which is what we're projecting him at for game two in game one. So, you know, he had a pretty quiet night in game one. I think to reach double-digit assists, did not reach double-digit rebounds. Had, I think, only 16 points, shot pretty low efficiency, and didn't take that many shots. You know, could obviously be another cold night for Westbrook, quiet night, but you know, I think we're gonna have to trust just the long form metrics and usage and kind of known shooting efficiency, which, you know, he's not like a super efficient shooter, but he's not you know, baseline at, like, I think he shot 7 for 17 in game one. So expect a good bounce back night for Westbrook, and you know, it is the preeminent or kind of premier game environment on the slate. Atlanta and New York both play pretty slow. That game is at a 213 total. Memphis plays pretty quick. Utah pretty slow. That game's at a 219 total. And then Washington plays, you know, breakneck speed. Philadelphia plays slow, but not like Utah, New York, Atlanta slow. So this game's at 228.5. So just the best game environment for the slate by a pretty significant margin. I mean, as I'm seeing it now, it's a clear 9.5 points better than the next highest game total. Obviously, Philadelphia with a slightly better implied total there, 8-point favorites, but still expecting a lot of scoring opportunity for this game, at least relative to the other games on the slate, which, you know, should bode well for, like, rebounds, for example, is kind of the stat where maybe Westbrook is least likely to get to double figures. So, you know, in a game that should run relatively quick, you know, I think it gives kind of him an elevated chance. And of course, playing 43 minutes as opposed to like his usual 37 to 39 minute allocation, I think should give him a bit of an elevated chance of getting to that triple-double, even if Philadelphia might slow down Washington a little bit compared to their usual up-tempo pace. Beal, it looks like, is right behind Westbrook, is kind of, well, not right behind Westbrook. I mean, we're seeing Westbrook as post-multiplier. What is that, like 9 points better or so than Beal? But Beal is looking like kind of the second preferred option at guard. Washington, you know, some of these teams, like, they skew more and less. Like, different teams, I guess, have kind of varying rotation expansion. Like we talked about, you know, earlier this week, Denver is a team that hasn't really tightened their rotation quite as much as other teams. Utah would expect, or kind of wasn't super broad in their, or sorry, wasn't super tight in their rotation in game one. Would expect that to be even less the case with Mitchell coming back tonight. So, Washington is looking like the teams that has been one of the teams more, at least through one game, like more inclined to really tighten their rotation and give extra minutes to the starters and really take away minutes from some of their role players. So, expecting that to play up for both Westbrook and Beal. Conley, we've got a decent projection on. He will be in a pace-up matchup against Memphis. The Grizzlies play relatively up-tempo compared to kind of their opponent average. The thing with Conley, he's been strong in the absence of Donovan Mitchell, but we do have Mitchell back tonight, so expecting some usage decline for guys like Conley or Bojan Bogdanovic. Ingles, Clarkson expected to play maybe fewer minutes, might not have as big of an impact on their usage rates. But 1.25x in kind of the up-tempo environment, still think Conley makes for a strong play. Have a slight preference for him over like a guy like Trae Young, who is probably going to play more minutes, probably going to have a higher usage role in the offense, but in a slower matchup, also with kind of the lower multiplier by 0.05, but kind of a toss-up between those two guys. It's difficult to separate. Derrick Rose, kind of one of the preferred higher multiplier considerations. He played a ton in game one and has been essentially playing starter minutes in kind of the closing stages of the regular season. The Knicks will start off with Elfrid Payton. They'll probably start both halves with him, but he only played like 8 minutes in game one, and that is down from what even during the regular season was like a high teens role for Payton. So Payton is really just a starter in name only. Tibbs has been very confident in Derrick Rose, and he's been really good, in game one and to kind of close out the season. So I think Rose is a higher multiplier guard you could take a flyer on. RJ Barrett, same case could be made. I think Barrett's maybe a little bit lower usage player than Derrick Rose. Maybe gives you a little more upside as like a rebounder. But expect them both to play a ton of minutes. Barrett, might even have a little bit more of a minute ceiling. Like we've seen points in the season where Tibbs has played Barrett like 40 minutes or so. But with Rose accounting for like 30 plus minutes, where his ceiling, I guess, for most of the season has been high 20s. Could see some of those minutes come out of Barrett's workload, but I still think a fine consideration as our projections would suggest. If we look at forward, Tobias Harris is standing out as the top projected forward. Looks like there's kind of a tight tier between Harris, Randall, Simmons, and then some drop off after Simmons, I guess. Harris is really like towards the end of the season, he's been taking just as many shots as Embiid. I think Embiid still remains kind of the 1A scoring option for Philadelphia, or at least if we're taking kind of long form over the course of the season, Embiid has been their high usage, high shot attempt guy. But Harris, as of late, has been challenging Embiid. He took more shots than Embiid in game one. Towards the end of the regular season, was taking more shots per game than Embiid, and I think makes a strong case for like the 1B as opposed to like second option in the Philadelphia offense. And as mentioned, Washington is going to play super fast, so I think we should see a couple extra possessions for Philadelphia. I think Harris at 1.25x, really good price point. He doesn't do nearly as much as Embiid in terms of like rebounding or shot blocking. Not going to be as much of a distributor as Ben Simmons. But he should play a lot. He's reasonably high usage, even though that Philadelphia front line can be crowded at times. Embiid, Simmons, Seth Curry is kind of not a total bystander. But I think 1.25 is a really strong multiplier for Harris. We've got a good projection on him. Randall at 1.2. He was cold in game one. Didn't shoot particularly well from the field, but should be playing minutes in the high 30s, potentially then low 40s, depending how Tibbs kind of lets them run. It is kind of the 1A scoring option. in New York. Probably just the first scoring option. Like, I don't think, the second guy like Derrick Rose or RJ Barrett are really even close to Randall as far as shot attempts. Great usage rate, north of 30%. Really for Randall, like there's been a big shift since Mitch Robb went down with injury. Randall has really taken on like more of an offensive load. I don't really think Randall plays like the center position. Think of him more as a power forward. So it's not like Mitch Robb being out contributes that many more minutes to Randall. But I do think one less guy in the starting lineup. Noel is just like not really a part of the New York offense. He will catch the timely lob, maybe second chance point, potentially opportunity to score in transition. But Mitch Robb was a guy that New York kind of made an attempt to feed the ball to and kind of get involved in the offense without Robinson in the starting lineup. I think just one less mouth to kind of make an effort to feed for the New York offense, and that has resulted in pretty regular 30% plus usage games for Randall. We haven't projected at 32% usage rate tonight. Should see him take field goal attempts in the high teens, probably low 20s. So like it as a bounce back spot for Randall. And Simmons, going to be low usage from a field goal attempt standpoint, but obviously the preferred point guard and kind of ball distributor for Philadelphia, also brings a lot of upside as a defender, steals and blocks. Really, both of those categories is a can rack up multiple in each category, and see his way potentially to like a 5+ steal plus block type of game. And I think does enough scoring in the offense where he could enter double-double, even triple-double consideration. Although I wouldn't say like he's got quite as much double-double equity as, say, like a guy like Randall or, of course, not Westbrook. J-Val stands out as like a high double-double equity play. Of course, Embiid, his multiplier, though, 1.05 is a little tough to swallow, given that, he hasn't been getting like huge run the way that, Simmons and Tobias Harris have. So yeah, with the 1.3x multiplier, we like Simmons rather, as a guard or a forward option. And then, as aforementioned, Embiid, obviously, like Embiid can fill it up from a stats standpoint. Just the 1.05 multiplier is somewhat tough to face. But there are a few guys in the league that can have like a explosive night the way Embiid can. He has potential for a 2020 night. On any given night, would probably need to see just like more minutes from him, which I'm not sure if that is a kind of conditioning or just like load management tactic that Doc Rivers is employing with Embiid. But he's been pretty consistently in kind of the low 30s, high 20s for minutes this year. So I think it would take like an unforeseen bounce in his minutes to, see him get like a big 35-minute game or something like that, which, I do think makes the upside somewhat limited. He's just going to have to be hyper efficient, I guess, in the, somewhat limited minutes he plays. Say limited on a normal slate in a regular season where there are a few guys that are getting above 35 minutes. A 30-minute game from Embiid, I think at 1.05 makes some sense. But in the playoffs, when you see, other 76ers probably going to run for minutes in the high 30s, Washington, New York even, are going to run guys in minutes in the high 30s, low 40s, getting only 30 minutes out of Embiid, I think does kind of reason for some concern as far as his just ceiling and floor, to be honest. Let's see. Brooks, Barrow we mentioned at guard. These kind of are higher multiplier guys that are worth some consideration. We saw Brooks, be pretty productive in some of the play-in games. So 1.55 is a price tag that could pay off for him. Some of these guys, just like Gafford, like hard to really see him playing, much more than minutes in the high teens or like low 20s. So some of these higher multiplier plays that have some steam during the regular season when they're projectable for, say, like, 22 to 25 minutes, just harder for them to sneak into optimal lineups when, they can only be projected for like 18 to 20 minutes, something like that. The minutes of some of these secondary bench players just kind of comes down a little bit, given the circumstances of the playoffs. And then moving along to the center position, we can scroll back up to the top. I think it's pretty tight at center. Like, we have Valanciunas projected as the highest center, but a case could be made for Randall, obviously. I think more of kind of an offensive-centric player. Case could be made for Gobert and Capella down here somewhere. Both these guys hyper-productive as rebounders. Gobert, an elite shot blocker, maybe the best shot blocker in the league. Capella is a very good, I wouldn't say elite shot blocker, but very good shot blocker, elite rebounder, leads the league in defensive and offensive rebounds. So, there are cases to be made for both Capella and Gobert. I mean, they are the best in the league at really each of those respective categories, blocks and rebounds. I guess I would surmise that the optimism around Valanciunas is that he is very good at both those things. I mean, he's kind of a borderline elite rebounder from a rebound rate standpoint. He, I think, is kind of more going to factor into the offense a little more than certainly Gobert. And, Capella's offensive role can be kind of volatile. It's just like how many rim runs can he get in a game, or how many second chance points can he create for himself, or second chance shot opportunities can he create for himself in a game. And some of those things, I think, can be somewhat volatile, as for Valanciunas, I think, has a little more of a designed offensive role carved out for him. We've also got a great minutes projection on him. Memphis has been a team that has been keeping their minutes pretty tight, giving more minutes to some of their starters, and keeping like bench run pretty limited. Guys like Clark, McDermott, Conchar, guys who were playing kind of a non-zero role in the regular season are quickly kind of declining into not seeing the floor at all. Jaren Jackson early in the playoffs was getting minutes in kind of the high 20s, low 30s, but they've kind of dialed his role back a little bit. And Valanciunas has really stepped forward as kind of one of the most trusted players in the Memphis team. So just expecting a lot of minutes for him. It's kind of the second best game environment behind Washington and Philadelphia. It's a pace down, I guess, spot for Memphis, but the other fast team on Slate, Washington, is being paced down as well, and they don't really have a trustworthy center. So like, it's kind of the best game environment for a center, especially a guy who's kind of dependent on rebounding and scoring. So I think Valanciunas is just a touch ahead of some of these other centers, but cases could be made for a number of the centers on the slate. We had Gobert. He didn't play a ton in game one. He was in foul trouble and eventually fouled out. It'd be interesting to see kind of what this Utah offense looks, or just the Utah minutes allocation looks like tonight. Obviously, we're projecting Gobert not to struggle quite as mightily with foul trouble. It's a very real possibility, given how much guys like John Morant attack the rim, and how Valanciunas is kind of a productive part of the Memphis offense. So figure that Gobert will be challenged with shots. Hopefully, if you're rostering him, he can stay out of foul trouble. And then, as mentioned, Mitchell coming back tonight. Expect that to drop Gobert's usage like a little bit, but really the guys who are going to suffer from the return of Mitchell are Conley to kind of a lesser extent, but really like Clarkson and Joe Ingles. Clarkson was a guy that we could feel pretty good about rostering at stages this year when Mitchell has been out, high usage with no Mitchell projected to play good minutes. Not really the case tonight with Donovan Mitchell back in. We've got Clarkson projected for only 24 minutes. That 1.25 multiplier made sense kind of when there was no Mitchell and Clarkson was playing minutes in the low 30s, but expecting that not to be the case tonight. But playoffs kind of cause coaches to do weird things and kind of play things in response to how the game's playing out. So, if Clarkson gets hot and is having a good game, and maybe Conley struggling, or Royce O'Neal or Bogdanovich aren't, Royce O'Neal's not really an offensive factor, but maybe he's struggling with foul trouble, or, not defending, or Bogdanovic is, not shooting well. Like maybe Clarkson could work his way into more minutes, but I think from a median standpoint, tough to be real excited about him at a 1.25 multiplier. So when we run the optimals, see how it kind of spits out. We do have Conley, the two Washington guards, Philadelphia forward guard kind of combo, Randall, Valanciunas. I think that makes sense. One derivation from that could be going with like Trae Young, who slightly lower multiplier than Conley. I think maybe a little more security with regards to his role. There's not the insertion of Mitchell that, gives us maybe some Conley volatility. So just looking at it, for cash game purposes, maybe going with like Young over Conley on account of lower volatility makes some sense. I think Rose could be an interesting cash play in that, you're kind of like, I expect Westbrook, Beal, Harris, and Randall to be very popular. Rose is kind of, I could see him flying under the radar, and at 1.55x, it's pretty high leverage spot where if he does have a big game, you're in a really great spot. But of course, if he lets down in some of these, like I expect Young to be quite popular, Conley to be relatively popular. If Rose lets down and like say Trae Young goes and has a big game, you are in a tough spot. So yeah, that's kind of thinking about the main slate. It looks like we have J-Val locked in actually at center. Guys that could usurp him like Randall have the forward eligibility, so they're getting, Embiid also getting more exposure in kind of our optimal runs at the forward position. If we were to put in some like diversification settings to try to, I don't know, get a more diverse set of lineups and kind of just see. So this is the exposure on the, cash game, purely optimal runs. Seeing a lot of these four guys. Westbrook, feels tough to fade on a night like this. Short slate. A lot of J-Val, a lot of Randall, a lot of Harris. So I expect these three guys to be kind of near locks for a lot of lineups. Probably the three of the more highly owned players. Maybe Beal be pretty popular. Young as well. Expecting Embiid to be popular. I would guess that we're going to be under weight on Embiid. I would expect him to be in more than 30% of cash game lineups. If we do throw some volatility kind of parameters or settings into the optimizer, so adding some randomness and some bounce and requiring lineups to differ by at least two players, and kind of see how things shake out, and still getting like a ton of Westbrook and Harris and J-Val. I thought kind of the decision between Valanciunas, Capella, and Gobert to be potentially tight, but our projections would suggest pretty high confidence in J-Val, and then using more of probably Embiid or Randall at center. See some Gobert though and Capella there. So a lot of Westbrook. I think Westbrook's going to be tough to fade tonight. Even though like there aren't that many players, like I guess Embiid is kind of close to him in multiplier and Beal. But then there's only two guys between Westbrook at 1x and then some of the, Mitchell, Randall, Young, like these are really good players who maybe on a full slate might be closer to Westbrook. So, I do think there's a not insignificant difference between like Westbrook and this kind of 1.2 to even 1.25 player bucket, maybe excluding Clarkson. But there's a pretty significant gap between these guys. But man, Westbrook has just been so good. I think the 1x multiplier, and even with that big gap, I think Westbrook's going to be tough to fade. And got some sprinkles of guys like Dylan Brooks or Barrett, Rose, Alec Burks, even Seth Curry, some of these Green. I'd probably stay away from guys like Gafford or Howard. Taj Gibson's an interesting one. We'll see what happens with Nerlens Noel. If Nerlens Noel seems to be truly questionable tonight. And maybe that's a good segue, I guess, into the New York-Atlanta single game contest. So we can start there with Noel and kind of the Taj Gibson discussion. We've got, for single game purposes, like a pretty good projection on Gibson as is. He he did play, I think, like 24 minutes in game one. Kind of expecting him to just pile up rebounds, hopefully get kind of luck box into a shot, some shots. Hopefully they go in. Um, Maybe get a couple of blocks or something like that. At 2.35x, like that's a pretty good multiplier on him. I mean, he is, some of these guys that are higher than him in multiplier just aren't going to play hardly at all. Tony Snell is kind of a non-factor in terms of his offensive role. Bullock, I haven't seen yet. He might be lower multiplier, but he's also not really much of a factor on the offense. Snell probably to even a lesser extent. We'll talk about Bogdanovich in a little bit. Peyton, just like there are a few guys higher multiplier than Gibson that figure to have any sort of significant role. And, if Noel plays, I don't think Gibson's role is going to be super expansive. And, we kind of, as you can see, 9% projected usage. That's hardly any offensive role at all. But, I could see Gibson become even more a part. He's already kind of a cash game consideration. It looks like, if I'm doing the math correctly, he will sneak into the optimal, but we do have some randomness stuff on there, so I can just reset that. But it looked like Gibson was the 5th highest projected player. So yeah, he is the last player in kind of that optimal. But yeah, if Noel doesn't play, I would expect Gibson to start at center. I think you could add a couple more projectable minutes for Randall. Maybe Obi Toppin plays a little more of a role, but still don't really see him getting that many minutes. Not sure they would go to Norvell Pele, I think, is kind of their backup center. I would guess they'd just go Taj Gibson would only be their only center. So I think the Noel injury is going to be an important one to keep an eye on. We're projecting him for 23 minutes, kind of an even split between Gibson and Noel, but Noel doesn't play. I think you could see Gibson with minutes up, in the 30s at 2.35x. If he just has a productive night rebounding the ball and, does a little bit of scoring and a little bit of defending, could be a great game for him. But keeping it with kind of these low multiplier guys. Bogdanovich, I think it's the multiplier is just way too high for a guy who is, starting shooting guard, probably has the second best offensive role in Atlanta. He and Collins kind of vie for a second scoring option behind Trae Young, but Collins' game is pretty interior oriented. He did take and make a few threes in game one, but Bogdanovich is just pure shooter, an efficient shooter. Shoots at threes at a high rate. He's just got a great role. He's non-zero as far as rebounding and assisting. I think he had 3 of each in game one. That's kind of, or maybe that's his season average. Kind of forget. Has a good steal rate. Has a good, not great steal rate. So he can provide some value as a defender. Just, way too high of a multiplier for Bogdanovich in these single game contests. If you're doing 5+ lineups or so, you're gonna have to. You can obviously run 10 lineups and get kind of exposure to every single player and, not have any player that you lock in, not have any players that you fade. And that obviously could work if you kind of get the right combos. But I think for these showdown contests, especially NBA, I think the approach of just finding some guys you like and just feeling okay with locking them in at any position makes sense. Bogdanovich just projects so well. If you're running 5 lineups, I think there could be a case to be made for locking in Bogdanovich at, your champion in all slots. His projection is just so much higher than any guy. Rose second behind him, and then the drop off from Bogdanovich to say Barrett is just so insanely high. So I tend to kind of let the optimizer do its work, but I wouldn't be surprised if we throw on 10% randomness and 10% bounce and run 10 lineups. No, not getting as much Bogdanovich as I would have thought, but I don't know if we take that down to say 5 and 5. just would expect and feel comfortable running a lot of Bogdanovic lineups. So maybe not locking him in at captain, but definitely being open to him as kind of the majority, and a high majority of captain. And of course, and maybe you don't want to use any diversification and kind of keep it super tight, no randomness, no bounce. Pretty much locking in Bogdanovic at captain for 10 lineups. There's obviously this Rose lineup that's available down here. I think a tough, this contest is probably going to be won and lost with decisions around which kind of sub 2 multiplier players you play, and how many of the elite guys, Young and Randall specifically, and maybe even Collins, or sorry, maybe not Collins, but like Young, Randall, Capella, how many of these guys do you go with? As of now, we have them, we have a number of kind of the higher multiplier guys projecting more favorably than them. I think sharp players probably understand that there's value in sometimes fading some of these low multiplier games or low multiplier players in a single game contest. It's kind of hard to get fully away from Young, Randall, Capella, like in all lineups, but I do think maybe newer players might flock to the names that they recognize, where just the projection that we have, is just simply better on guys like Bogdanovic, Rose. I think Rose is a great play at 1.8. Like Tibbs just isn't using quickly a ton. Peyton is a starter and name only, and like Rose is the starting point guard and super high usage. Been really good as of late. Barrett kind of quiet in game one, can do a little bit of everything. Alec Burks off the bench, super high usage. It's kind of just a question of what his minutes might look like. Not so sure that the Noel thing impacts Burks in a huge way. Maybe he sees a few extra minutes if New York tries to go small and go like a good bit of lineups where they go like Randall at center, Barrett at power forward, like Burks, Rose quickly or something like that. I could see them do some of that, but I don't know. I would expect Burks to kind of just be in his normal role. He was pretty effective in game one, and the 1.95 multiplier, pretty solid on him. Touched on Taj and kind of the injury consideration. Touched on Capella in the main slate. Trae Young, we haven't really talked about. I think fine play from a raw projection standpoint. It's got the second best raw projection behind Randall. Just kind of a tough price tag to eat when, there are guys like Bogdanovic, which going to be hard to keep out of lineups, or guys like Rose going to be hard to keep out of lineups. You start getting into this Barrett, Burks, Gibson, Capella tier where, I don't know that Barrett needs to be in all lineups. Not even really sure that like Rose needs to be in all lineups, but if you're using our projections, he probably will be in a lot of them. I think Trae Young will be a part of a number of lineups, and I don't think he should be being faded at all. But might see if you're kind of using our projections or projections that are similar. You might see kind of low exposures on guys like Young and Randall. And Capella and Collins. I find Capella tends to go like a little underappreciated and undervalued. So I don't know. I'd say we'll probably be close to in line with kind of field ownership on Capella. But like just looking at it, I think we'll, if you're using these projections, kind of using, I don't know, some of these settings, like I think you're just going to see lower exposures on guys like Randall and Young than you might initially feel comfortable with. I do think it's potentially Slate to be okay with that, especially if Noel gets ruled out. You're looking at Bogdanovic and Gibson and Rose kind of all near locks, and then you have 2 roster spots left for decisions between like Barrett, Burks, or Strong, Young and Randall. Being okay with taking some shots on like guys like Gallinari at 2.15. Toppin would be interesting. I'd be kind of curious to see what would happen if Noel gets ruled out and, Toppin's projectable for like 18 minutes or so. 2.9x multiplier is nearly the highest. He will be the highest multiplier of a player that, can be expected to play. and like he's not, total zero usage guy. Would be interesting to keep an eye on top, and could see him be a part of some lineups if Noel gets ruled out. If not, I think it's going to be tough to find him in many rosters. But yeah, that'll do it for today. We'll be back on Friday. Not sure what games are going to be running that night, but we'll discuss multi-game main slate stuff if there are 3 or more games. If not, we'll be doing just a single game kind of champion discussion. But yeah, we'll talk through all of it and get you guys prepared for that slate. But looking ahead to tonight, good luck, everyone. If you are an ASA subscriber, can encourage you to utilize some of our SuperDraft specific tools. If you're not an ASA subscriber, it's worth noting SuperDraft does have this strategy page where there are write-ups on some of the players. Believe some of our projections should be embedded in the app, or sorry, in the article. So encourage you guys to take a look at that. If you, that's looks like it didn't pop out to the SuperDraft. But if you click on this strategy page, you'll get a pop out to that strategy page where you can find some write up on some of the players, projections embedded into the page. And you can kind of use that for hand building purposes. So I encourage you guys to check that out. All right, that'll about do it. It's gone on a little longer than expected. We'll be back on Friday with more coverage of the NBA playoffs and as it pertains to SuperDraft contests.